Hi, and welcome to today's episode of the podcast. This podcast is called Vimoh Talks, and I am Vimoh. That's Vimoh. My Instagram handle and my Twitter handle are both Vimoh, Vimoh, and that is where you can reach me in case you have feedback. This podcast is a weekly podcast and it talks about contemporary Indian culture. And since I'm also an atheist, I sometimes talk about superstition and even superstitions which are disguised to look like they're not superstitions. And the superstition, or at least a superstitious tendency that I want to talk about today on this episode, is the simulation hypotheses. The simulation hypothesis is something, basically, the reason I'm talking about it is because firstly it's uh, to me it appears to be something adjacent to theism, and secondly I'm talking about it because it's becoming increasingly popular even among people who describe themselves as atheists to consider the simulation hypothesis as something that is an accurate description of reality, or at least an interesting thing to consider when describing the nature of reality. And I think this is problematic for a few reasons. Because, as I mentioned in my previous episode about why I am not a Hindu atheist, and the video about how belief in karma is almost the same as belief in God, uh, when we talk about God, we are often talking about the view of God as it is understood in Abrahamic religions. And that is because the new atheist movement kind of originated in the West, and most of their criticism of religion and God took the form of criticism of Abrahamic religions. Abrahamic religions subscribe to the idea that there is a personal God, that there is a God with a personality, that there is a God who has the qualities of a human being: intelligence, creativity, intention, compassion, etc. The problem with that is that over here in this part of the world, that is not always the shape that God takes. The shape that God takes here in this part of the world is sometimes formless. Sometimes it is not a personal God. Sometimes it is a cosmic consciousness. Sometimes it's a universal personality. Sometimes it's a supreme Godhead of some sort, I guess. I've heard all these phrases being spoken by people who believe in God, who call themselves religious or spiritual, etc. My problem with the simulation hypothesis, firstly, is that it is close or at least adjacent to that kind of theism, where we are not imagining that a cosmic being created the universe, but we are still kind of sort of giving credit for the cosmos to some kind of cosmic intelligence. Because think about what a simulation is. A simulation is something being run by someone with consciousness and with at least the intention of simulating reality. And this is very directly an allusion to some kind of consciousness. Now, this consciousness can be an alien life form, this consciousness can be humanity from the future, this consciousness can be a number of things. But the thing that remains unchanged is that when we are talking about the universe itself being a simulation, we are ascribing to the universe or the creator of this simulation qualities that are very similar to the qualities that we have as human beings. Also, think about what a simulation is. What exactly does a simulation do? A simulation is something that causes us to think that what we are looking at is real, even when the thing that we are looking at may not be real. Essentially, a simulation is a thing that fools our senses. And when we talk about simulation, we are essentially, the universe is definitely not a simulation. The amount of disturbance that, or maybe it is, maybe the universe is causing these disturbances to happen so that I may not be able to come to the conclusion that the universe is not a simulation. whatever is simulating the universe is preventing me from coming to the conclusion that the universe is not a simulation. Or rather, it has given up on me. It knows I'm far too smart. It's just preventing me from making this video so that you will not find out that the universe is not a simulation. Anyway, jokes apart, where was I? I was talking about how when we talk about simulations, we are essentially talking about fooling our senses. And our senses being the senses of a sentient organism that lives on one planet, on in one solar system that exists in one corner of a great big galaxy, which itself is one among many, 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 many galaxies that we know of existing in the known universe. We are talking about simulation. When we talk about simulation, we are talking about fooling our senses. And our senses should not occupy this primary a position in our understanding of the universe. Our senses are the senses of a human being, and we are one animal. We don't even completely understand how every animal life form or even plant life form on this planet experiences reality. There are animals on our own world, snails for example, whose brains fire at a much slower rate than ours. Their version of reality is quite different. Their version of reality is like if you put an apple in front of a snail and then you quickly take it away uh, within like 2 seconds, the snail will not see your hand come in and the apple move. To the snail, who's processing reality at a much slower rate than you, the apple will simply disappear. So, when we are talking about the universe being simulated, we are talking about the rate at which we are perceiving reality and that rate somehow being faked. And I think that's a little presumptuous because we also talk about finding life on other planets. And I think I have spoken before about how our quest for life on other planets is somehow limited by our assumption that life is going to be like we are. Think about it. What is consciousness? Our conscious experience of reality is what is being simulated according to this theory, right? Do we even know what consciousness is? Do we can we be sure that every form of life that can exist will be conscious in the way that we are? I understand that if we were to find rocks on another planet which were alive but not conscious in some way, perhaps we will struggle to classify them. But we are so early in our quest to find life elsewhere in the universe that I think it is nothing except presumptuousness to think that we understand what consciousness is. And because we don't understand what consciousness is, we cannot also come to any decent conclusion about what is the meaning of a simulation. We are basically talking about human beings being fooled into thinking that something virtual is actually real. But you get my point, right? We don't When we say simulation, we are essentially talking about our sense organs. And our sense organs cannot be the only criteria on the basis of which we decide the nature of reality. It is entirely possible that there are other ways of reality, that there are beings out there who perceive reality in very different ways from us. Here, let me give you another example of this kind of problematic thinking. One of my favorite science fiction novels is a novel called Star Maker by a man called Olaf Stapledon. In this novel, there's a description of another planet and the beings who live there. Although this planet is much like Earth in many ways, there is one crucial difference between the dominant species of this planet and human beings. And that difference is that for human beings, the primary mode of perceiving reality is visual. We do it using light. We do it using, colors and appearances, etc. So when we talk about simulation, we are essentially talking about many things, but primarily we are talking about a visual element. Think about it, and you will come to the same conclusion. When you think about virtual reality, you are essentially thinking about visual illusions. But what happens in this novel and in this particular section of that novel is that Olaf Stapledon describes an alien species for whom the primary method of perceiving reality was taste. It was chemical. They used the sense of taste to do everything, to create art, to communicate with each other. There was a description of some kind of a radio like device being carried around by these people to consume news, and even that device came with chemicals, and the way they consumed the content that was coming to them through these quote unquote radios was through taste. They applied their mouths to this device, and the complicated tastes that they experienced became the way they processed information. And this novel by Olaf Stapledon called Star Maker is not the only example of this. We have seen other examples of such kind of life forms in science fiction. The recent movie Arrival had an alien species whose primary mode of engaging with reality, including altering reality, was language. I mean, for us, language is vocal. We make sounds or we make markings on a surface with some kind of a rock, and we understand what the other person is saying. Or we use that method to record information to be consumed by people who come after us. But for these people, for these alien beings in the movie Arrival, language was a way to transcend time itself. I hope you're getting my point. My point is that when we talk about simulating something, we are talking about fooling human sense organs. And human sense organs are not the only way using which reality may be processed. We live in a very small, we are limited to a very small corner of the known universe, even. And it is entirely possible that the rest of the universe contains beings whose way of processing reality is very, very, very different from us. I have also spoken about previously about the illusion of objectivity, the illusion that human beings are capable of objectively evaluating reality. Sure, our sense organs are the only things we have, but that should not make us think that our sense organs are the only thing that anyone has. And if we manage to avoid falling into this pit, we may come to the conclusion that we are faced with an impossible number of choices as far as our cosmic origins are concerned. And our cosmic origins have to do with some of the most common mysteries. Like, people ask, what caused the Big Bang? People ask, why is the universe so suited to life? And we do our best using our imagination to solve this problem. And the simulation hypothesis is perhaps one such theory. There is nothing wrong with considering it as a possibility. But while we consider possibilities, we must also be aware of the fact that the possibilities that we are considering are severely colored by our own nature. When we talk about simulating something, we only talk about simulating something because we know what a simulation is. And how likely is it that the greatest mystery of the universe will even be comprehensible to us? The mystery that is the origin of the universe, or maybe even, if you want to get theistic about it, the purpose of the universe. It is entirely likely, in fact, I would say it is far more likely that when we find out the answer to what is the universe or how does it work, it will be something entirely removed from the human context. And that human beings would discover that they are no more than an accident. And that all of life is perhaps no more than an accident, just as almost everything else is, most likely. This is a guess. Obviously, I cannot come to any conclusion about what is truth because we have far too little information about the universe. But I hope you get my point. Another reason I have a problem with the simulation hypothesis is because it is, we don't live in a time where there is a lot of rationality in the discourse about religion. And I doubt there ever was, but it is conceivable that religion may be more rational. But something like the simulation hypothesis, when it becomes mainstream, begins to feed people. A few decades ago, something like the quantum revolution happened. We still don't completely understand how quantum entanglement works or what even is it. But that has not stopped religious people from appropriating the vernacular of quantum physics in order to support their religious superstitions. There is no dearth of people who are completely convinced that consciousness is matter, even though that's just one way of looking at things and is not even a widely accepted way, a scientific theory. Something similar, I fear, may happen with the simulation hypothesis because this has Hindu mythology written all over it. It is not going to surprise me at all if tomorrow someone says the simulation hypothesis is the most likely explanation of our cosmic origins or the nature of reality. And of course, we knew about it thousands of years ago. We have our sacred texts talk about something called Maya, which says that all of reality is an illusion, or that the cosmic dream of Brahma is what the universe is, because that also is there in Hindu mythology with no basis, with no foundation to justify these beliefs. Something like something like the simulation hypothesis might be hijacked and used by these same people to as some kind of a framework to support the same old quackery that has been going on for such a long time. Now, I can understand that many people who are fans of the simulation hypothesis do not really consider it to be objectively true. But even they, when they talk about this, should be careful about the ideas that they are putting out in public and who is consuming those ideas and who eventually is in a position of power to be able to take advantage of the mainstreamification of these ideas. All I have to add after having said all this is that to me it seems like the simulation hypothesis is a cousin, at least, of the idea of intelligent design. Intelligent design right now is limited to proving that evolution has some kind of intelligence behind it. But if something like the simulation hypothesis becomes mainstream, then it is equally possible that somebody will use it to say that God is the intelligence who has created the simulation that we all exist in. And of course, Eastern mysticism will then fight Western mysticism over property rights. But that all goes without saying. Religions have always fought and they will always fight. It is up to atheists and materialists and philosophical naturalists and, most importantly, skeptics to keep a lock on the gate and then prevent these people from coming in. Because although I have no problem with imagining things or even encouraging imagination, I'm equally wary of the uses to which imagination is put. That's all I have in this episode. Thank you for listening. If you are listening to this on my YouTube channel, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon so you always get notified when I put out a new episode. If you are listening to just the audio file, then know that you can find this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Audible, Amazon Music, Ghana.com, JioSaavn, and wherever else you listen to audio. And click the subscribe button. If you can write a review of the podcast somewhere, please do. Leave a comment and all that. And I will see you in the next episode. Thank you for listening.